Welcome to Arise YouTube, where we exist so that way you can experience God. If you haven't already done so, make sure to click that subscribe button so that way you can keep up with our weekly sermons. With that being said, we pray that this sermon blesses you and encourages you to take one more step closer to Jesus. Enjoy.
Let's talk about the second aspect of the teleological argument now. Not only are the heavens designed, but you are designed. This is you in the womb at 11 weeks. Question, is this animal, mineral, vegetable, or human? That's a human being. In fact, let's go back even further than 11 weeks. Let's go back to when your mother and your father got together to conceive you. Have you guys had this talk before? I see some young people in here, so I'll try and be discreet. I also see some older people in here, so I'll try and be discreet just in case you've forgotten how this works. When your mother and your father got together to conceive you, your mother unconsciously perfumed her egg to attract your father, and then your father sent the entire population of the United States, 300 million soldiers, toward your mother's egg. And then there was a race. And you won. That's right. Don't let anyone ever tell you you're not special. You beat out 300 million others. You have blown away anything Michael Phelps has done. Now, seeing some of you limp in here earlier makes it hard for me to believe you were the fastest soldier in the gene pool. But you were. Now, your soldier was 20 to 30 times smaller than a grain of salt, yet it contained half of the 3.5 billion letter software program we call your genome, your DNA, in that one little soldier. And your mother's egg was about the size of a period at the end of a sentence in an average book, and it contained the other half of the 3.5 billion letter software program, your DNA, all the letters in the right order. And when your soldier and your egg came together, a new 100% genetic human being was created. You know, you have not received any more genetic information from this point until right now. Your genetic information has just duplicated itself. In fact, there were only 4 things separating you from adulthood: time, air, water, and food. Those are the same 4 things that separate a 2-year-old from adulthood. Does this have implications on the abortion issue? Yeah, I think it does. We don't kill the 2-year-old. Why do we kill the unborn child in the womb? Genetically, it's the same. You say, wait a minute, Frank. You can't legislate morality. All right. No extra charge for this. This comes from our first book, creatively titled Legislating Morality. All laws legislate morality. Every law declares one behavior right and the opposite behavior wrong. You can't think of a law that doesn't legislate morality. The only question is, whose morality will we legislate? And when people say, don't legislate or don't impose your morality on me, I say, why not? Would that be immoral? And by the way, you're imposing your morality on me right now. You're saying I ought not impose ought nots, but you're imposing that ought not on me. Why do you get imposed your ought nots, but I don't get to impose mine? Actually, there's a better answer to this. When somebody says, don't impose your morality on me, you ought to say, this isn't my morality. I didn't make this stuff up. I didn't make up the fact that murder's wrong, that abortion's wrong, that rape is wrong, that theft is wrong, that men were made for women and women were made for men. And the best way to perpetuate and stabilize society, which is the reason the government's involved in marriage to begin with, is to legally recognize that man-woman relationship over every other relationship. I didn't make any of this stuff up. This isn't my morality. This isn't your morality. This just happens to be the morality. The one Thomas Jefferson said was self-evident. The one the Apostle Paul said, the Gentiles are not of the law written on their hearts. Look, everybody knows this morality, but some people don't like it. In fact, if you have a problem with immorality, you don't have a problem with me. I didn't make it up. You have a problem with the Creator upon whose nature this morality is derived. All right, no extra charge for that. Let's go back to this. From this point till right now, a construction project of astonishing complexity began taking place. Cells began multiplying at a rate of 4,000 cells per second. Brain cells began multiplying at a rate of 100,000 cells per second. For most of you anyway. Some cells became brain cells. Other cells became heart cells. Other cells became lung cells. How did they know how to do this? Nobody knows. Some cells went so far across you to become what they needed to become that it would be equivalent to you today walking across the United States alone. And that construction project continues to this very moment. You just made 4 million new red blood cells. You just made another 4 million new red blood cells. You just made another 4 million new red blood cells. Knock it off. I mean, are you thinking about this? Or are you going, wait a minute, Frank, time out. I got to concentrate. New red blood cells coming up. No, this is just happening. How is it happening? Well, Aristotle discovered something 2,400 years ago. Of course, he didn't know anything about blood cells, but he did notice that all of nature's going in a direction. For example, why does an acorn, if it's properly nourished, always go in the direction of becoming an oak tree? Why doesn't it become an elm tree or a birch tree or a seahorse? You say, well, it's programmed to become an oak tree. Yeah, well, who programmed it? And is an acorn conscious? Is an acorn in the ground going, all right, what do I have to do to become an oak tree? No. It's not conscious, but it reliably goes in the direction of becoming an oak tree. If it doesn't have a mind of its own, and it doesn't, yet it reliably goes in a direction, there must be an external mind directing it toward that end. This is what Aristotle called the unmoved mover. Thomas Aquinas came along in the 1200s AD and he said, this is going to be my fifth way to argue for God. That all of nature's going in a direction, and if it's going in a direction, there must be a director. Right. That's my words, not his. But he's saying it has a cause, a final cause, an end, a goal. Nature's not random. Nature goes in a direction. If it's going in a direction, there must be a director. By the way, this is why we can do science. Why can we do science? Because nature's orderly. Nature goes in a direction. Nature does the same thing over and over again. It has reliable cause and effect. If the laws of nature changed every 5 minutes, we couldn't do science. This is why in our book, Stealing from God, I make the case that science needs God. There would be no ability to do science unless this world was orderly. Why is it orderly? Because there's an orderer out there keeping things going in a direction. Now notice, ladies and gentlemen, this is not the Big Bang cause way back when we already talked about. This is a cause every single second the universe exists. Because the laws of nature that do the same thing over and over again are going in a direction, and that has to be sustained every single moment. This is why the Apostle Paul could come along and said, in Christ we live and move and have our being. And Christ holds all things together. And the writer of Hebrews says, God sustains all things by his powerful word. You know that God does three things? He creates, he sustains, that's the one we forget, and he intervenes on occasion in miracles. So he creates initially, then he sustains his creation, and when he wants to get our attention for something special, He'll intervene in the space-time continuum. So this argument, I think, is one of the best arguments for God. Sometimes it just takes a little bit while to explain. But every single second the universe exists, you need a cause. You know, Aristotle mistakenly thought the universe was eternal, that it had no beginning. But you know what he said? Doesn't matter if it had a beginning. You still need a cause every single second to keep it going. That's his point. All right, and the Bible talks about this. So, not only are the heavens designed, you are designed, and all of life is designed. So there must be a designer. Now, you might be saying to yourself, Frank, the atheists have to have arguments against this. Yeah, they do, but they don't work. In fact, especially with regard to the creation of the universe, they are really in trouble there, as well as the design of the universe. How many have heard of this man, Lawrence Krauss? Have you ever heard of this guy? Lawrence Krauss, a number of years ago, wrote a book, A Universe from Nothing, where he tries to explain how the universe could come into existence from nothing and by nothing without a cause. His problem is that his nothing is not really nothing. It's something. And even atheists who reviewed his book admitted he doesn't solve the problem. Now, I respond to his book in our book, Stealing from God. I don't have any here, but you can get it on our website. But what I want to do is I want to show you a short video where Lawrence Krauss went on the Colbert Report. Remember Stephen Colbert when he had his show on the Daily Channel or whatever it was, the Comedy Central? Colbert's a smart guy. I don't agree with his politics, but he is a smart guy, and he pretty much grilled, in a fun way, Lawrence Krauss on his theory that the whole universe could come from nothing without a cause. Notice how many times in this interview Krauss refers to nothing as something. He talks about the laws of gravity or the laws of nature or the laws of quantum mechanics. He talks about if you wait long enough, as if there's time existing already, and there isn't. And Colbert, in a fun way, nails him on several different points of this interview. Now, you can find this interview on YouTube. It's about 5 or 6 minutes, but it's fun. You guys ready? Here we go.
Okay, doctor. Sweep away thousands of years of mystery and awe at creation that let the greatest minds in civilizations all over the world to lead to one point: a single divine loving creator. Destroy it. Why is there something instead of nothing?
It's really easy because nothing's unstable. And in fact, there's no evidence for any deity. Everything we know about the laws of physics, which are remarkable and have changed everything about the way we think about the universe, what nothing is and what something is. This table here is mostly empty space.
This table cost me $500. Well, you tell me I got ripped off? Well, no, wait, let's go back a second, okay? Nothing is unstable. What do you mean that nothing is unstable? Nothingness is nothingness.
Well, the physics has changed what we mean by nothing. In fact, nothing is a empty space, is a boiling, bubbling brew of virtual particles popping in and out of existence
so
fast.
That's not nothing. That's something. Why are those virtual particles there?
Because of the laws of quantum mechanics. And they tell us that even though you can try and count and see what's in there in empty space, you'll see nothing. But in fact, one of the biggest mysteries, and the reason I wrote the book, one of the greatest discoveries of the last 50 years is that, in fact, empty space weighs something.
Empty space weighs something.
In fact, it's the dominant stuff in the universe. Nothing is almost everything.
I am never going to lose those last 5 pounds. Okay, you say there are 3 different types of nothing.
That's right.
What are the 3? I didn't know there was such a variety. A sampler platter of
I would have thought
nothing.
You'd be an expert on it. But
on
in any
nothingness?
Case,
Yes.
In any case, there are 3 different kinds of nothing. First, empty space, which I'd say is probably the nothing of the Bible, an eternal, dark, empty void.
Do you mean like a true hard vacuum?
Exactly.
That's nothingness you're talking about?
Most of people would have thought that would be nothing.
That's what I think nothing is.
And then I
also
tell you that,
Baltimore.
But then if I tell you that kind of nothing actually is unstable, if you wait long enough, that kind of nothing will always produce particles.
By saying that it will.
If you wait long enough, the laws of quantum mechanics tell us that particles will burp out of empty space and eventually fill up a universe. It's really remarkable.
To me, that sounds like the empty space may be empty to us, but it is some sort of sheath or membrane between us and some other reality.
No, there's nothing. Well, there's absolutely nothing there until there's something.
What's the second type of nothing?
Okay, well then if you don't buy that, then I can say, well, you might say, well, that's not nothing because there's space.
Yeah.
Well, it turns out if you apply quantum mechanics to gravity, then in fact, space itself becomes dynamical, and universes, spaces themselves and time can pop into existence where there was none before.
So in some theoretical end space, before the moment of creation, there can be no time and no space and no energy?
And no energy. Zero energy.
And then suddenly, from nowhere and from nothing, comes something and somewhere.
And all sorts of stuff. And it sounds like the ultimate free lunch. And
Yes,
it is.
it is.
It is. And it really, and what's remarkable is it's possible without any supernatural shenanigans. And
But
to me-
so listen, stop with that.
why?
Why is what you're doing, whatever this is? Because obviously, because I am not in the priesthood, I can't understand the scrawls on the blackboards you people down at, where are you?
Well, that's why I wrote the book, so you could.
Where are you?
actually.
You're Arizona State.
Arizona
Okay.
State. Mm-hmm.
You priests of theoretical physics, you can explain to each other what you mean with your language of math. And I have to take that on faith.
No, in fact, you should be skeptical.
I am.
And in fact, you should, I know. And that's why you should, that's why I tried to provide the arguments in the book.
But I will never read it. So why other people should, you should buy it.
Buying it is important.
Buying it's good.
Yeah,
Okay. But why does what you're saying have to be an attack on my God?
it doesn't have to be an attack.
But that's all you've done. You've attacked my God for
I've
the
just
last
made
6
him-
minutes.
No, you have. All I've said is you don't need him.
That's an attack.
No.
Of course we are here to love God,
the
serve
universe,
God.
as we understand it, we've changed our minds about the universe. We've learned that the universe is more remarkable than anything we ever thought before. And in fact, changing your mind and in fact being wrong is wonderful. You should try it sometime. It's really amazing. It means that the fact that the universe is more remarkable than the fairy tales that were talked about by Bronze Age literate peasants before we knew the Earth orbited the sun.
You're not attacking at all, but go ahead.
No, but I mean,
Leslie,
we
so
should
you
celebrate.
say, so
We
you
should
believe there's no
celebrate.
God?
I don't even use the word believe. The point is
There is no God.
There's no need for God.
Is
to
there
make the universe-
God? Is there God?
It's
what would you
unlikely.
say?
There's no evidence for God.
Okay.
There's no evidence for God.
So let me ask something. If there is no God, okay, if there is no thing called God, if he is nothing, can't something come from him?
Boom. Now notice that Krauss says that space, matter, and time can come into existence as long as you start with space, matter, and time. Well, duh. He's not solving the problem, is he? Also, notice he says this, there's no evidence for God. Well, we just went through some evidence for God and we're still not done. What might you ask somebody who says there's no evidence for God? Well, one thing you can ask is, well, what kind of evidence would you need to see? But actually, what question I want to ask people who say that is, why is there evidence for anything? Think about that. Why can our 3-pound brains ascertain truths outside of our skulls about what really goes on out there in the real world? And we can draw valid conclusions about the way the world works, reliable cause and effect. That's best explained not by just molecules bumping into one another, which is what the atheists think, but that's best explained because this universe is put together in an orderly way, as are our minds, and we can ascertain truths about it. In other words, the very fact that we can do science, the very fact that we can figure out what's going on out there outside of our skulls is better explained by God than just molecules bumping into one another. Our minds can ascertain truths about the real world because our minds are made in the image of the great mind. Atheists have to steal science from God in order to say he doesn't exist. They have to steal the fact that the world is orderly and our brains and minds work from God in order to use arguments to say God doesn't exist. In effect, they have to sit in God's lap to slap his face. Also, when you ask, why is there evidence for anything? That really gets to the point of the fact that this is an orderly universe. And you didn't hear him say this because he mumbled it, but he said it in other contexts. In this interview, he mumbled it. But he also said, I celebrate there's no God. Why would you celebrate there's no God? Because you don't want to be held accountable. You see, Krauss labels himself not an atheist, but an anti-theist, meaning he doesn't want God to exist. He's against God. He's not open-minded at all. He's trying desperately to find reasons to believe that the source of reason doesn't exist. Because he doesn't want God to exist. He doesn't want to be held accountable. All right? All right, now let's move down to our final argument for God, the moral argument. And let's start on the football field. How do you know that your quarterback throwing a touchdown is better than your quarterback throwing a pick six? That's where he throws an interception to the other team and they take it back for a score themselves. So how do you know that? Excuse me? Tom Brady threw a pick six? How do you know? Score. What does that matter? Rules. What does that matter? That's not it. How do you know? This is the interactive portion of the program. You got to know the purpose of the game, right? If you don't know the purpose or the goal of the game, you can't say a touchdown is better than a pick six. You can't say that a touchdown is better because you don't know what best is. You got to have a purpose. You got to say, okay, the touchdown gets us closer to the purpose, where the pick six takes us further away, right? That's the only way you can know this is a good play, this is a bad play. Same thing is true in life. The only way you can know here's the right way to live life and here's the wrong way to live life is if you know the overall purpose of life. If there's no purpose to life, then you can't say this is right and this is wrong. Well, you know, if the atheists are correct, there is no purpose to life. So you can't say that loving people is better than murdering them. Not in an objective way, anyway. It'd be just your opinion. Now, notice in football, the rules or the purpose of the game comes from outside the game. In other words, when the players show up to play, the rules are already set. Field's already set. You know, they don't make up the rules on the field. It's already cut. It comes from outside the game. In pro football, it comes from the commissioner and the owners. Now, the rules of football are arbitrary. They could be different. In fact, every year they tweak the rules a little bit, right? But the rules of life, which also come from outside the game, are not arbitrary. They come from the ultimate commissioner, right? They come from God himself, and he says, here's the purpose. By the way, what is the purpose of life? Why are we here? Glorify God. What does that even mean? Where does that come from? Is that in the Bible? Where? Huh? What? Ecclesiastes chapter 12 says, fear God and keep his commandments. Where's the glory part? I don't hear that. You guys are reading from the Westminster Confession. You're not even Calvinists. I'm not saying it's wrong, but where is it? Glorify God with your body, okay. The purpose of life, I think, is when Jesus is praying for us in John chapter 17, and he says to the Father, he's praying to the Father, now this is eternal life, that they, meaning us, he's praying for us, may know you, God the Father, and Jesus Christ whom you've sent. The purpose of life is to know God, and then if you throw the Great Commission in, to make him known. Now, as we talked about yesterday, it doesn't just mean intellectually know. It's not just belief that. Everybody already knows that God exists. It's to trust in him. That's the purpose of life, to know God and to make him known. If there is no God, however, that means there is no purpose, which means you can't say this is the right way to live and this is the wrong way to live. In fact, if there is no God, the Nazis were not wrong. In fact, I had a debate with a Jewish atheist a number of years ago. His name was David Silverman. It's on our YouTube channel. He was the president of the American Atheists. And at one point during the debate, I said, David, you're an atheist. That means the Holocaust isn't really wrong. And he tried to say it was wrong, and he finally admitted, you're right. The Holocaust wasn't wrong. And I said to him, David, if your worldview is telling you the Holocaust wasn't really wrong, you've got the wrong worldview. You already know it's wrong. It's one of the deepest intuitions you have that murdering innocent people is wrong. Don't get rid of that deep intuition. Get rid of your worldview that tells you the intuition's wrong. Right? And by the way, how did we convict the Nazis at the Nuremberg trials after World War II? They said, hey, we're just following orders. What did we say to them? You had a moral obligation to disobey immoral orders. Why? Because your government isn't God. There's a standard beyond your government. And if your government gives you orders that tell you to do evil, you ignore them. You defy them. You see, what is that standard beyond government? Well, it's called international law. C.S. Lewis called it the moral law. Thomas Jefferson in the Declaration of Independence called it nature's law. It's God's nature. Anything that deviates from God's nature is wrong. So that standard is God's nature. If he doesn't exist, you can't say the Nazis were wrong. It's just your opinion against their opinion. If there is no God, then love is no better than rape. Oh, you might like love better, but it's not really better. It's just your opinion. If there is no God, there are no human rights. You know, it seems in our culture, people are inventing human rights every 10 minutes. They got a right to this and a right to that. Do you realize there are no rights to anything unless God exists? There's not only no right to an abortion, there's no right to life if there's no God. There's not only no right to same-sex marriage, there's no right to natural marriage if there is no God. Everything's just a matter of opinion if there is no God. By the way, I know the transgender issue is really a big issue, particularly here in Florida with Governor DeSantis and all this. But do you realize that transgenderism presupposes fixed genders? Because if I'm a man and yet I think I'm a woman, I have to have some idea what a man is and some idea what a woman is to know the difference. Also, if I want to make the so-called transition, which by the way is biologically impossible, you can't change your biology. Okay? You might be able to mutilate your body, but you can't change your biology. If I want to do that, I have to have some idea what a man is and some idea what a woman is. Otherwise, there's no such thing as transgenderism. In fact, I don't know if you've noticed, but in the LGBTQ community, there's a bit of a civil war going on. Because if the T's get their way, that there are no genders, the L, the G, and the B don't exist. Right? How can you be lesbian if there are no genders? How can you be bisexual if there are no genders? How can you be gay if there are no genders? You can't. In fact, the feminists aren't happy with this either. Why? Because if there are no genders, there are no women. If there are no women, there are no women's rights. The whole thing is going to implode eventually. And you need to tactfully stand for the truth. Because if you don't stand for the truth, you're going to be made to care about this. I don't know if you notice this. I'm just telling you the truth. You can look this up on by yourself. On Transvisibility Day, the HHS, that's the Health and Human Services Department of the Biden administration, put out a memo that said, if your kid as young as 3 years old thinks he or she is the opposite sex, you have an obligation to give them gender-affirming care. You know what that means? That you have to affirm them in the sex they think they are. And if you don't, the memo said, we may come and take your child away from you. If you can't stand up for children, your own children, you can't stand up for anything. We'll talk a little bit about this tomorrow, but if there is no God, murder, slavery, and racism are not wrong. Just your opinion. If there is no God, religious people have never done anything wrong. You know how atheists are always complaining how religious people are doing evil things? Well, if there's no God, they can't be doing evil things because there's no good to even know what evil is. The Crusades were not wrong if God doesn't exist. Religious people doing evil things are not really doing evil things unless God exists, which is really the sixth point here. Tolerance is no better than intolerance if there is no God. Now, by the way, are Christians commanded to be tolerant? Be careful how you answer. No, Christians are not commanded to be tolerant. Christians are commanded to be loving. You see, tolerance is too weak. Tolerance says hold your nose and put up with them. Love says reach out and help them. And how do you help people? You tell them the truth. The problem is in our culture, we think tolerance or we think love means approval. That if you love me, you'll approve of me. Question, how many people in here are parents? All right, how many people in here are former children? All right, that's all of us, right? Question, if your parents approve of everything you wanted to do as a kid, were they loving parents? No. You're not loving if you approve evil. You have to stand in the way of evil. You know, in the passage that everybody reads at their wedding, but nobody obeys, 1 Corinthians 13, Paul says, love rejoices in the truth. Love always protects. Love always perseveres. What does that mean? It means you don't approve of evil, you stand in the way of evil. Even if the other person doesn't like you, you stand in the way of evil for their own good. So love does not mean approval. Finally, you can't complain about the problem of evil if there's no God. Why? Because if there is no God, that means there's no standard of good, which means evil doesn't even exist. C.S. Lewis recognized this. Early on in his life, he was an atheist because he went through World War I and he saw a lot of injustice, a lot of evil. And he finally realized that argument didn't work. And he ultimately put it in the classic book, Mere Christianity. Here's what he said in Mere Christianity. He said, as an atheist, my argument against God was that the universe seems so cruel and unjust. But how had I got this idea of just and unjust? A man does not call a line crooked unless he has some idea of a straight line. What was I comparing this universe with when I called it unjust? You see, you wouldn't know what a crooked line was unless you knew what a straight line was. You wouldn't know what injustice was unless you knew what justice was. Something can't be immoral unless something is. Something can't be not right unless something is. So the standard that tells you what good and bad is God's nature itself. If that doesn't exist, then evil doesn't exist. I know that sounds counterintuitive to say, but if God exists, or let me put it another way, if evil exists, God exists. Not because God is doing evil, but because he's the standard of good by which we'd even know what evil was. In fact, you could put it this way. The shadows prove the sunshine. In order to have shadows, you got to have sunshine. In other words, in order to have evil, you have to have good. Oh, you can have sunshine without shadows. You can have good without evil, but you can't have shadows without sunshine. You can't have evil without good. So if evil exists, then God exists. Evil does not disprove God. Evil may prove there's a devil out there, but evil does not disprove God. Now, during the Q&A after lunch, if you want to talk about why does God allow certain evils, that's another question. But we can't say that it disproves God. It actually shows that God exists. So here's Christopher Hitchens, who wrote the book, by the way, God is Not Great, How Religion Poisons Everything. Notice the word poisons here is a fun way of saying religion is evil. But religion isn't evil necessarily, because there would be no such thing as evil unless there was good, and there would be no such thing as good unless God existed. So I told Christopher in our debate, I said, Christopher, I agree with a lot of what you put in your book, because this describes a lot of the evil that religious people have done. I said, you're right, we have done a lot of evil. But number one, you don't have a standard by which to even judge that. And secondly, you're sort of proving our worldview. Why? Because we all agree we're evil. If we weren't evil, we wouldn't need a savior. In fact, I said to him, at the debate, I said, Christopher, I'm a hypocrite. I can't live up to what Jesus told me to live up to. But if I could, I wouldn't need him. If I was perfect, I wouldn't need a savior. You can get to heaven by being good. You can. You just got to be perfect your whole life. Too late for me. How about you? So I said to him, when people say to me, I can't go to church because there's too many hypocrites down there, I always say, come on down, pal. We got room for one more. We're all hypocrites. The church is a hospital for sinners. It's not a country club for saints. We're all fallen. Now, I know a lot of people stay out of Christianity because the evil that Christians have done. And that's a stain on Christianity. We need to repent of any of that, and we need to treat people properly. But you might want to ask people who say, I'll never be a Christian. Those Christians are evil. You might want to ask them, what do they mean by evil? But you also might want to ask them this. You might want to ask them, when someone plays Beethoven poorly, who do you blame? Wow. You don't blame Beethoven, do you? So when someone plays Jesus poorly, who do you blame? You shouldn't blame Jesus. In fact, Just because I'm not true and beautiful doesn't mean Jesus isn't true and beautiful. I don't live up to the standard Jesus asked me to live up to. Hopefully I'm getting closer, but I'm never going to make it this side of eternity. But don't look at me, look at Jesus. Newsflash, Christianity is not Christians. Christianity is Jesus. So keep your eyes on Jesus, not on what his followers have or haven't done. And by the way, religion does not poison everything. Everything poisons religion. I poison religion because I don't live up to the pure words of Christ. One more thing about this. What does it mean to submit? Nobody likes this word. We don't want to submit. Well, let's break this word up. Sub and mission. First of all, what does mission mean? Mission means you have a goal, you got a purpose, you're going in a direction, right? Sub means you're putting your efforts underneath that mission to help achieve it, right? You might be putting your personal goals aside so you can achieve this other bigger mission. So if I'm a diva receiver on a team and I say to the coach, you got to keep throwing me the ball. And the coach says, look, you'll get your chances, but we can't keep throwing you the ball all the time. If we do, we're going to lose. And I go, you know what, coach, you're right. I'm going to submit my own personal desires to the mission of the team. Is that a good thing? Yes. Of course it's a good thing. Now convert that to life. Do you know if God exists, and he does, he has a mission for us, to know him and to make him known. We would be foolish if we didn't submit our own little personal missions to his, because his mission is eternal. We're here to build his kingdom. And if we think we just want to go our own way and do our own thing, we're going to be regretting that later. We need to submit to achieve the mission he's given us. Now, what can we say about these three arguments? By the way, there's a lot more in the books on the moral argument. We don't have time to go through here. But what can we say from the cosmological argument? We can say that we have a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, personal, intelligent cause, right? From the teleological argument, we get even more information about this being intelligent and also sustaining the universe. And then from the moral argument, we get that this being is also moral, loving. Now look at this, ladies and gentlemen. We have a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, personal, intelligent, sustaining creator who's moral, and we haven't even opened the Bible yet. This is called natural theology. This is what everybody can do, whether or not they have a Bible. They can know that God exists. In fact, the scriptures even teach this. Romans chapter 1, God's invisible qualities are clearly seen, so that people are without excuse. You know there's a God because he's left effects behind. In fact, if anyone ever asks you, how do you know that God exists? Here's what I think you should say. I know God exists by his effects, because I'm reasoning from effect back to cause. This is what scientists do. They find an effect, they're trying to figure out what caused it. If there's a creation, that's the effect. We're reasoning back to a cause, a creator. If there's design, that's the effect. We're reasoning back to a cause, a designer. If there's a moral law written on our hearts, that's the effect. We're reasoning back to a moral law giver. If we have the ability to reason and to think and to ascertain truths about the real world, that's the effect. We're reasoning back to a cause, a mind. As we go further, we'll see there's evidence Jesus rose from the dead. That's the effect. We're reasoning back to a cause, God. So you're reasoning from effect back to cause. This, as I say, is what scientists do. Even if you have a personal experience of God, that's an effect. You're reasoning back to a cause, God. That's how you know that God exists. You say, well, don't atheists have good reasons against this? I gave you one from Lawrence Krauss. It doesn't work. But in principle, atheists can't explain anything. Why? Because most atheists today are materialists. They think everything's made of molecules. You're just a molecular machine. You're just a moist robot. Because everything you think is the result of the laws of physics. You don't have a mind, you just have a brain, they say. You don't have a soul, you just have a body. That's really what they think. Here's the problem with that. The biggest problem, C.S. Lewis put it best. I can't say anything better than C.S. Lewis, so I'm just going to read you what he said. It's a 2-slide quote. Here it is. Follow this. He said, suppose there were no intelligence behind the universe. In that case, nobody designed my brain for the purpose of thinking. Thought is merely the byproduct of some atoms within my skull. But if so, how can I trust my own thinking to be true? But if I can't trust my own thinking, of course I can't trust the arguments leading to atheism, and therefore have no reason to be an atheist or anything else. Unless I believe in God, I can't believe in thought, so I can never use thought to disbelieve in God. As John Madden would say, boom. You can't say it any better than that. Now, I know you're taking pictures of these slides. Again, I'll put the number up at the end. I'm going to send you all these slides in a PDF format so you don't have to scramble to do that, okay? But Lewis is pointing out that if you can't explain thinking, you shouldn't be trying to use thinking to explain that God doesn't exist, because your very ability to think comes from God himself. Our minds are made in the image of the great minds. If they're just molecules bumping around in there, you shouldn't believe any of it. Now, we've got all these attributes of God: spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, personal, intelligent, sustaining, moral, creator. But how do we know it's the God of the Bible? For that, we got to go to the third question: are miracles possible? And you're probably going, well, Frank, gee, we got limited time here. This one doesn't take long, actually. All right? Before we take a break, I'll do a little bit of it, and then we'll come back, finish it, and then get to the New Testament. But let me ask you guys a question. Suppose a king in one jurisdiction wanted to communicate with another king a great distance away. How could he do it? What would he send? He would send a message, right? And what would be on the message? So the receiving king would know it came from the original king. There would be a seal, right? That seal would be in the corner of the message, or would seal the message tight, so the receiving king would know this really came from the first king. It would seem to me that that seal would have to have a couple of characteristics. Number one, it would have to be unique to the king, because if everyone had it, obviously you could send false messages from the king. And number two, it would have to be difficult to forge. Again, you could send false messages from the king if you could make his seal, right? Well, it seems to me this is what miracles do. Miracles are like a seal or a sign from the ultimate king, telling us, you ought to listen to this person. This is a message that comes from me. In fact, this is the purpose of miracles in the Bible. The purpose of miracles in the Bible is to confirm a message. The miracle confirms the message. The sign confirms the sermon. Now, let's look at the Bible for just a minute. How many miracles are there in the Bible? Approximately. Anyone? A bunch. You guys are very precise as Pentecostals, aren't you? There's about 250. Depends on how you count them. Some of them are bunched up. But let's just take the round number 250, and let's just take it from Abraham to Jesus. That's about 2,000 years. I know there's miracles on each side of that, but that'll just give us a window to make an approximation here. If we have 250 miracles over 2,000 years, how often do you get a miracle on average? Homeschoolers, help me out here. What's the answer? How often do you get a miracle? Go ahead. How often? No, you're getting 250 miracles over 2,000 years. 250 into 2,000 homeschoolers is 8. Thank you. You get one miracle every 8 years. Does that sound like a lot? One miracle every 8 years? I don't know. When I'm reading the Bible, it seems like they're happening all the time. They're not. But do you get a miracle every 8 years? Is that the way it works? Here's a miracle, 8 years later, another one, 8 years later, another one. No. Where do miracles occur in the Bible? When God is doing miracles through people, when is he doing them? Are they random? No, they're in 3 basic time periods. Around Moses, Elijah and Elisha, and Jesus and the apostles. Why? Because these people have new revelation, and God needs to give them new confirmation. There's a new message that needs a new miracle. There's a new sermon that needs a new sign. Why are people going to obey Moses? Because Moses can do miracles. Why are people going to obey Elijah and Elisha? Because they can do miracles. Why are people going to obey Jesus and the apostles? Because they can do miracles. Because miracles are the way God communicated to the rest of the people to say, these people speak for me. Okay? They weren't done randomly. Now, every once in a while, God would do a miracle directly, not through people. But when he's doing miracles through people, this is when he's doing them. And that's not very often. You know, there are periods in the Bible, there's hundreds of years, no miracles. Because if they occurred all the time, they wouldn't be special now, would they? Here's the problem. Some people believe miracles are impossible. Is this being recorded, Brent? Let's try and keep this between us. Can we do this? Like, for example, people believe Noah and the ark is impossible. It's crazy. Can we just keep this between us? That Noah and the ark is crazy. I mean, really, can we? I mean, come on. You really believe this? And for some reason, there's another miracle in the Bible that nobody believes, the resurrection. I asked you guys yesterday if anyone's seen anybody resurrect. Nobody raised their hand. Why? Because it doesn't happen. In fact, if it did happen, we would say, okay, it's reasonable to believe, but none of us have seen it. Yet for us to be Christians, we have to believe something we've never seen. How rational is that? And for some reason, the big problem miracle in the Bible is Jonah. Is that a whale of a tale or a tale of a whale? I mean, what's the deal with Jonah? Can you really believe in Jonah? Ladies and gentlemen, what is the greatest miracle in the Bible? Yeah, the greatest miracle in the Bible is not the resurrection. The greatest miracle in the Bible is... I got some of you a second time. Yeah. The greatest miracle in the Bible is the first verse. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Here's the interesting thing. Even atheists are admitting the evidence for this. Now, they don't think it's God, but we already pointed out what else could it be? If space, matter, and time had a beginning, it's got to be a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, personal, intelligent cause. They're just ignoring that. They're just denying that. But if Genesis 1:1 is really true, if it's really true, can God do the Noah miracle? Of course he can. Yeah, Noah is crazy, unless God exists. Of course people don't rise from the dead, unless God exists. Of course Jonah's a fairy tale, unless God exists. Of course miracles are possible if God exists. And if God can do the first miracle, the biggest miracle, the creation of the universe out of nothing, can he do little miracles inside the universe? Of course he can. And we'll talk about more why he can do that right after the break. And then we're going to do the New Testament.
Thank you so much for watching the message. We hope that this message has literally left you feeling inspired and encouraged to take one more step closer to Jesus. If you haven't subscribed, make sure to subscribe to our channel. Share this on all your platforms of social media. We thank you so much for watching. We will see you next week.